I like what I do. So, I think, if I had to do it again, even with all the ups and downs, I think, where I've landed is what I've proved, with my calling.
This is the Construction Veteran Podcast. Construction Veteran Podcast. Connecting and celebrating veterans in construction. Now, here's your host, Scott Friend.
Welcome back to the Construction Veteran Podcast. I'm your host, Scott Friend. Today, I'm excited to have a former colleague of mine who's a former Army Ranger, former 82nd Airborne, and former Special Forces, who now leads the construction industry in pharmaceutical construction, Mark Blackbiller. Let's dig into it. Hey, Mark, how's it going, man?
Fine, but how are you doing today?
I'm good, man. I'm very thankful that you're on. I appreciate you doing this.
I just appreciate the opportunity to be able to help in any way, man.
Absolutely. I appreciate that. So Mark and I know each other from a former employer. We were both part of a large group of veterans at that company that were there really to support each other. And we just, I think, found that veteran mutual friendship. And he was kind enough to join on the podcast. So Mark, I want to talk a little bit first. This is obviously a veteran podcast. So I want to talk about your service background. So can you take me through that real quick? So how about, what drew you to the service and what did you do?
Yeah. I grew up in a little small town in Louisiana, Shreveport, Louisiana. And the little town thought I was a better athlete than probably all the colleges did. So I'd banked into getting a scholarship, but just didn't work out. And I wanted to get out of that town so bad, the first thing I could find. And, I ended up going to the military and test pretty high and had decent grades, but I fell in love with this picture of this guy walking through a swamp with the M4 just above the water and perfect camouflage. And I was like, hey, what's that? And they're like, oh, well, you don't want to do that. You could be a pilot. You could do this. You could do that. And I was like, no, what is that? And they're like, that's an Airborne Ranger. I was like, that's what I want to do. And that took me on my path to Fort Benning, Georgia. I did the base training AIT, spent some time in the 3rd Ranger Battalion. Then after that, I went to Korea for a year. And then I ended up in the 82nd Airborne Division, where I spent the majority of my military career. I was in the 3rd of the 505th Parachute Infantry Regiment, back when there was still a 3rd Battalion. And I did some time there, and then I went to Special Forces selection, got selected, and went to Q course. And I spent a little bit of time on a team as a Bravo, and then I had a substantial parachute injury, shattered my pelvic girdle, broke my left leg, and rehab took me about a year and a half, and then I got levied to be a recruiter. So I decided that was the end of my military journey, and I decided I needed to find something else. But I had made a commitment to myself that when I got out, I would never have another job with my name stitched on my shirt, and nobody ever tell me how to cut my hair.
I love that. Man, what a transition too. Into the recruiting world. Golly, going high speed and then into the recruiting world. I bet that's not easy. So thanks for sharing that, man.
And that was my decision. I decided that I'd gone through a substantial amount and invested a large, amount of my youth, and it's kind of getting chewed up and had a substantial injury. And, they made that decision for me to be a recruiter. I was kind of like, you know what, I could probably do a little bit more of myself and recruit. No hit against anybody that ever does recruiting for sure, but it just wasn't in my career path or my mind at the time.
Yeah. Well, that's encouraging to hear. You kind of knew that wasn't for you and there was better stuff out there for you. So what do you do now, Mark, in the construction industry?
I'm the director of operations for a company called PROTECS. We specialize in design, build, life sciences, and high-tech facilities. We lead, from the front. We are construction-led and engineered serviced. We specialize in building facilities that, that make vaccines and life-changing and sciences and technologies that, save lives. And, it was a huge transfer from being a door kicker to, a director, but, my path was laid out for me when I separated from the military, and some successes and definitely a lot of failures along the way.
Yeah, you say that, that transition from door kicker, but I think I'd venture to say a lot of guys that get into that community, there's just that passion, I think, for humanity and doing the right thing. I mean, the SF motto, "De oppressively bear," right? And I think that heart for people and that love for people definitely transfers over. And so when we were chatting, I love what you said. These facilities might be the one to find the cure to cancer. So I think there's that heart in you, and I really appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah, I've had the pleasure of working on several facilities, that are actually doing either something called CAR T therapy, or, some of the major pharmaceuticals in the industry that have cured forms of cancer and are actively producing medications that do cure cancer. And, part of, a lot of construction, every day you have a safety brief. And that's something that I make sure that we communicate to every trade that's on one of these projects, that, the work that we do has a direct effect on the world. And, these facilities that we build and manage and operate, that medication or that treatment that they're doing within that facility might be key to somebody in their own life, ability to live a comfortable life. So it's important that we do what we do to a very high degree of specialization. We pay attention to detail, and we put all our hearts into it.
Yeah, I love that you guys do take that to heart. I was talking to Dan Lombardo during my last episode about it's such a good transition from the service to safety. I've met a lot of safety guys, and I think, again, it's that passion, just that love for people. And like we were chatting when I had built hospitals with a company, how important it was for us to tell folks, hey, your kids could be seen here. And so it puts this new perspective on what you're building, is that, hey, this is not just a bunch of drywall. Like, this is a big deal. This could change lives. So I appreciate you sharing that. So let's back up again to when you were a recruiter. You decided to get out. How did you find your way into the construction industry after the service?
That was an interesting time in my life. It wasn't a very successful transition by any means necessary. I failed for a while, just in general life adjusting, going from, Staff Sergeant Black welder to Mark. At the time, when I separated, there wasn't really a good career path or translating from my MOS into the real world. So, I kind of flailed around for a little bit. I did odd end jobs while I was trying to figure out school. Adjusting to basic things like, the concept of rent, or, paying for food, or, so the chow hall. That was an interesting, transition, and it wasn't done very successfully for a long period of time. But, I remember one of the key things that really hampered me is at the time when I separated in '99. I remember somebody telling me, well, with your job, what translates to you is you can be a cop or a fireman. And certainly there's nothing wrong with either one of those career fields. But again, I had made that choice in my life where my name wasn't going to be stitched on my shirt. Nobody was going to tell me how to cut my hair. It wasn't anything wrong with that structure. It's just I had different ideas about where I wanted to be and how I wanted to progress my career. So, it was hard at first. I found my way into residential construction just by doing odds and end jobs when I wasn't bouncing or bartending, basically, and going to school. I picked up carpentry. I started doing some framing, and then I started doing some finished work. It translated into, cabinets and, trim work and flooring. And then I kind of learned residential, just, OJT, how he kind of did it in the military. And then I sat for my general contractor's license back in 2007, 2008, and then the economy hit. So, I was a young contractor that couldn't get any work because, the housing market failed, and I had to push reset again. And I was married at the time, and I had a newborn, and I was like, man, how is this going to happen? So I decided to exhaust the rest of my GI Bill, and I went to East Carolina University, and I got a degree in construction management. And after that, I moved to Raleigh, and I got my first job in pharmaceuticals by doing something I said I would never do. I started working for a drywall contractor. And just so happens that that drywall contractor specialized in pharmaceutical applications and clean room installations. So I cut my teeth in pharmaceuticals, learning it from the inside out. I learned it from the clean room, and then I started attaching myself. And I think this was like a military trait, you know, when you're a team leader, you lean on your squad leader and you learn his job. And then when you're a squad leader, you want to learn your platoon sergeant's job. And when you're a platoon sergeant, you want to learn the first sergeant's job. So it's kind of like that next man up, know your boss's job type of mentality. So I wanted to learn about how the buildings themselves were built, the structural parts of it, the mechanical portions of it, the process, you know, why does this water move there, and why does this water have to be clean, and why does the air have to be filtered, and why is this specific, and how does it learn, you know, how does it go into FDA compliances, why is it so important? And that kind of, my path just kept getting, you know, heading up the more I gained knowledge. And it's that thirst for knowledge to where, you know, I've gotten to the point now to where I've been blessed with the opportunity to be the director of the entire Southeast region for PROTECS. And, you know, looking back, separating in 99 to see that guy that I was with that military mindset, but not a clear direction, you know, struggling to do framing jobs on the side to where I am now, it's definitely been a journey.
Yeah, I was going to say that is quite a journey. So what is it that drew you and excited you specifically about that pharmaceutical? So you talked about a clean room. Can you explain to folks real quick what a clean room is?
Yeah, I you know, fell into this, and I jokingly been referred to at a couple of previous employers as the pharma nerd, which I embrace it because I you know, I get to geek out about certain things that are specific to life sciences and pharmaceuticals. And a clean room is a controlled environment in which a process takes place, that either it's testing or actual production of a vaccine. You know, these environments are very tightly controlled, and you know, there's compounds that can't be introduced. You can't have organic compounds, which means you can't build a wall out of, you know, typical drywall and a wood stud. It has to be a metal stud and drywall with usually a fiberglass face, or there's no drywall at all, and it's a modular clean room system. And the air changes, you know, the amount of air that goes in and goes out is regulated per the type of clean room you do. You know, the filtration and the HEPA filtration of the air that comes in that, you know, takes out particulates that could potentially compromise a test or pollute a dosage of a medication. So it's very controlled. Everything is taken into account, from the amount of air, the humidity, the heat disbursement from a person that's working in the space is all calculated within this clean room to do this science. And you take that and you compound it by, you know, you're talking about one room, but what does that look like from a facility aspect? How much power, how much water, how much air is being moved throughout these buildings in order to produce that environment that can make these medications? And, you know, that kind of science and that kind of technology is what goes into these spaces. And that's what, you know, the FDA controls what's allowed to be produced and the environments in which they're able to produce it. So that's why, you know, these medications, you know, some of them, they have a cost to it because of a reason, you know, that's why they're controlled and they're made in that environment. These buildings have to have these certain capacities in order to make these medications.
Man, that is wild. First, there's a lot to that. I would love to nerd out with you, man. This is really interesting stuff. I love that. It was kind of similar on the hospital side. A lot of that, I wouldn't say clean room necessarily, you know, it wasn't to that degree, but a lot of the similarities working in operating rooms, excuse me, and building those things. So I agree. It's a fascinating part of our industry, but I didn't realize how detailed the pharmaceutical side got. So thanks for sharing that. So looking back to what you did in the service, do you think that's helped you now in this industry? And if so, how so?
I think, aspects of not particularly my job title of what I did translate, but the overall military experience definitely helped me. It's given me, direction, the ability to, I think the biggest thing it's given me is ability to identify other like-minded people. When you run into a guy in the industry or anywhere really that's, post-military, you kind of you can tell, what's certain, it doesn't matter, what branch they are, but you can tell that drive, that, attention to detail, that need to have, camaraderie, the family, and, sharing that common goal is easier to find with a vet, if you're a vet. And, sometimes, people that haven't had that experience, of going to basic training or a boot camp and then, going to a unit or going to combat together, the people that are civilians, they don't understand, that relationship and that, ability to recognize that from one person to another. And, I think that's been, something that I've benefited from military service, just to be able to identify those other like-minded individuals that have that passion to succeed and, that family and that loyalty. And it's been beneficial for me. I was joking with you, earlier, I just hired a guy that was a CD, and he's just absolutely killing it on my job. I love this guy.
I'm not surprised.
It's been great.
I'm not surprised at all. So kind of to what you said, I feel like in the field, so, as a superintendent, I'm going to speak through that worldview, obviously, but I think in the field, that these guys that didn't serve, we still connect really well with them because that's like the closest you're going to get. You go through these really stressful projects that might be a year or so longer, and maybe somebody's losing money and it's hard or there's tough design, but we kind of bond together, even if they're your trade partners. They might not work for your company, but you're all part of that same team. And so I went back to the field because I found that camaraderie that I had missed. And I like to tell folks that's why, part of the reason why this is such a good industry for veterans to get into, because of exactly what you said. And I agree that you can spot another vet from a mile away, just kind of how they carry themselves. But there's that level of trust, I think, that's already built in. And I had said when I interviewed Dan Bradley that I know not every vet is like that. There are knuckleheads out there, but I would say 90% or more, maybe, I don't know, that most of those folks are going to have like-minded morals and ethics, and you just know you can probably count on that individual.
Yeah, and one of the other things that you touched at too is you being a superintendent. That's very translatable to being in a military unit. I was a superintendent for a long time, and I spent time in the field with the guys, kind of leading men, leading soldiers. It's very translatable. You're leading subcontractors, and that interpersonal relationship. I spent time in the field, and then I graduated up through project management, up through a project executive, and it's where I'm at now. But that time in the field and working with the men and women out on a job site, it was very, very influential with, how I look at it from where I am now, to make sure that, those are the people out there that are busting knuckles. They're the ones that build the building. I'm not building the building. So, I have more of an appreciation for them out in the field. You've experienced that. Do you find that, kind of, a similar experience between being a superintendent and a project manager?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So I did spend some time in the office as a PM, but I agree with you that I kind of say the same thing. It's not me. I'll give you an example. Whenever we maybe reach a milestone or we pass an inspection, not that this is a bad thing, but it never really sat right with me when my team goes, "Hey, good job, Scott." And I always go, "I didn't really do anything. Exactly. I didn't build anything." And so these guys are responsible. They're the ones swinging the hammer. I'm not doing that anymore. If I have to, something's wrong. Like, we're not doing our job if I got to put my tools on again. But yeah, it's, man, there's something special about the field. And I was actually just talking to someone today that I'm now in a position leading a large job that I can make a difference in these folks, and I can be that leader that I hope that they want. And it creates a really good bond with these guys. So I kind of relate it back to, you got that maybe junior officer, because I'm 36. I'm a young superintendent. I get it. And there's gentlemen and ladies that are 20 years my senior in their trade, and I'm supposed to tell them what to do. I'm supposed to line out the day, but there's that mutual respect. I think the respect for the role that I have to play, but my respect back to them. I've multiple times I've referred to them as like the warrant officers. They're this expert, and I respect them and I need them. Much like a brand new, butter bar lieutenant is leaning on that sergeant first class or staff sergeant to really guide them. Say, how do I do this? You've been doing this a long time. And I just get a kick out of it. So I go out to the field, man. I learn something every day. I love what I do. And I'm just kind of there guiding the process, So I think we're very similar in that regard. And you said, you hit the nail on the head. It's relationship driven. And I think that's the whole industry. I think that's the service too, a lot to a point. You don't want to lose guys. So you're training them. You love them so much that you don't want to lose them. You want to bring everybody home. And that's that love for that individual. It's not just, some other body. You get to know these people and their families. So there's a lot of support there. So tell me, if you were to go back and you're transitioning out again, kind of knowing what you know now, do you think you would continue and go back into this industry?
That's a good question, because I don't think that I had this industry, specifically, with life sciences construction. It wasn't even in, I wasn't even in the know of it. It wasn't even the realm of the universe for me. Looking back, I think I definitely knew that, I didn't want to be in a public service position again. So private sector was definitely, where I was headed. I think construction, I have a passion for it, and it wasn't necessarily something that came from a family thing. I just, I like what I do. So, I think, if I had to do it again, even with all the ups and downs, I think, where I've landed is what I've my calling. I enjoy this. I enjoy the opportunity, to, build these types of facilities and be part of a team that does it. So, I think, I would do exactly the same.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned the ups and downs too, because the lows can be pretty low. Let's be honest. The lows in the industry, whether it's a financial issue or like you mentioned back in 2008, that crash, that hurt a lot of folks. Of course, not just within the industry, but that was tough. I was still active duty at that time, so of course I didn't feel it. But there are ebbs and flows, and man, the lows can be really low. You don't have work, or you talk about on the trade side, guys getting laid off, and it's tough. But the highs can be really high. It's just that rewarding satisfaction of standing back and saying I had a hand in that, even though I didn't personally build it. So along this whole journey, you separated in '99. We're in 2023 now. Is there anything that you think you would give advice, like if you could go back to early Mark and try to change something, what would you change along that journey?
You talk about military Mark or civilian Mark?
Oh, let's go back to Mark joining right before boot camp. Any of it? Yeah, your journey to where you got today.
Oh man, I just think honestly, I probably should have paid more attention in school.
Oh man, can't we all say that? Yeah.
I remember when I got out and I went to Fayetteville Technical Community College, and I took a placement test after my time in the military. And I was telling my wife this recently, and she was just, she was laughing. She couldn't believe it. I remember I took a placement test, and I had graduated high school in '93, and I was taking this placement test, and I was looking at this math, and I was like, man, when did you guys start putting letters in it?
That's good.
I was so, mathematically challenged.
Man, you were out of touch.
I was out of touch. You don't use that as much, when you're jumping out of airplanes and doing
Yeah.
road marches,
Yeah.
chasing down the bad guys and kicking doors. It wasn't necessarily part of, life. And, it took me a while to do there, but then, subsequently, changing from Bachelor of Arts to Bachelor of Science, having to do college algebra, trigonometry, and geometry, calculus, statistics, and all that, and, physics. And I was like, this was something that I never thought that I would ever have to do, but I had to treat it like a job, and I had to treat it with a military mentality, because when I did go back to college, I had a child. And it was kind of, it's like when you've been on a movement to daylight and type of situation, and then you hit the objective, and there's no question, you have to get through it, you have to hit the target, you have to get through it. And that's kind of how I had to approach transition, from the military. And looking back, if I had to make that decision, I probably would have paid more attention in school.
Yeah, and I think you kind of alluded to it. There's no options. You gotta. There's that cliche, embrace the suck, right? So you're taking it from the service. Now you're going into school, and a lot of guys struggle with that, right? I mean, just full transparency, right? We struggle with that when you get out. I think every vet knows that, especially when you're maybe your mid 20s to late 20s, and now you're in school with 18, 19-year-olds going to college for the first time. It's a shock to the system. But
yeah,
no.
I was that obnoxious guy in the class that stayed and like asked all the questions at the end when everybody's trying to, all the kids were trying to get out of class, because they were
Shut up,
worried
man!
about,
I gotta go party. Gosh.
exactly, and I was there I was there at the right time. I was old enough and I was challenged enough to realize that I had to, change my life. And, I couldn't guarantee that, if I had been that traditional kid, graduating high school and going to college, I would have been, successful at that.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Well, you got all your party years out when you were a young enlisted guy. I'm sure we all did. So you put that all behind you. It just wasn't in college.
That's right. Different fraternity.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you joined the world's largest fraternity. So we got, man, I meet so many veterans within the industry. So what would you say to encourage other folks? Like I like to give my example. I almost left the industry. We shared a little bit about our history in the industry, and I had a really just rough go, and I was done with it. When I was in the reserves, I thought, man, I'm going back to active duty. I'm done with this. And a lot of it was some dumb reasons. There was just people, and I was taking it the wrong way. And so let's say there's a vet out there, and that's not my mindset now, by the way. I love what we do, but let's say there's a vet out there kind of stuck in that rut, especially focusing on the ones that are maybe within that first 5 years of transition. What would you try to say to those folks to try to get them to stick with this industry and just motivate them on what could be?
You got to be patient, and you have to have a willingness to learn. When you achieve, certain levels in the military, when you get out and you start over again from nothing, you have to humble yourself a little bit. You have to, and I've heard all kinds of people say, oh, well, your military experience makes you a natural leader. And, I've seen some people, and I've been exposed to some other veterans that have been in the industry that, they get out and, they've had 4 to 8 years of service, and they think they're going to walk into a 6-figure project management guide because they were a squad leader. And, and it's not, it doesn't translate like that. You have to, learn how to function with individuals that didn't have the same type of, instruction that you've had in the past, or the same thought processes, or the same value system. So it takes a while. You have to, gun it out a little bit. You have to be a little bit patient, and you have to earn that again, just like you earned any promotion you did in the military. Necessarily just because you had prior military service doesn't mean that you're going to walk in and, be a leader automatically. You still have to learn how to be a leader, just in a different way with different people with different mindsets.
Yeah, it's good. I can somewhat relate. So I was prior enlisted, and then I got commissioned when I was in the reserves. And, you're starting over. Now there's a little bit of clout that comes with it just because, I'd been downrange. I was an NCO when I got out. But it was very strange to start over kind of bottom of the rung. Man, so back to your comment about folks getting out maybe after 8 or more years, I had a face-to-face interaction with a lot of these guys. I was doing was it a veteran, like a hiring fair, and the DAV put it on. It was great fair. I was an operations manager at the time for a company down in Houston, and so there was a bunch of us lined up, a bunch of companies with our booths and meeting folks, and it broke my heart when I would have like a sergeant major or a master chief coming up to me. You know, they want, just like you said, they want to start, hey, here's what I'm doing. I want to walk into this high figure position. And
Yeah.
I was honest with them. I had to break the news. I was very respectful, but I would say, hey, please don't take this the wrong way. But, you know, you might have to start out as an assistant such and such or whatever. You know, don't focus on the title. I'm telling you, you know, you got to learn the industry. I experienced that. I went from the GC side to the sub side. I had to learn a lot. But that helped me when I came back to the GC side. But I think you hit the nail on the head with the comment of humility. And I don't know, I'm just kind of thinking out loud here. I don't know if that's because when folks are transitioning, they're kind of beefing them up to, well, I see a lot of this lately on LinkedIn where they don't have their title. They have, well, I was a director. Well, you weren't a director. You were, you know, maybe a staff sergeant, or I was this, I was that. No, man, it's okay to put what you did and to explain that. That's part of your story. So that's a big passion of mine is, hey, that I was down on myself when I got out, and I discounted my service, but I had a lot of construction experience when I got out, and I went, oh crap, this is transferable. So, you know, combat arms folks are great leaders. Yes, absolutely. But share that why. You know, I'm leading people through firefights or doing whatever. You know, this is a tense situation, and I got to keep my cool. So I'm really good under stress, and here's why. So I think there's ways to relate it, but don't expect to walk in to like the C-suite by any means. You know, you see senior officers sometimes they got to get out and start over too. Now they're starting at higher figure positions, I'm sure, but they've still got to start off at a certain level and work their way up. So,
Yeah, and what I was saying, you know, is the patience, you know, it's that you may not be there instantly, but I guarantee you that work ethic, that drive, and that ability to function in, you know, especially in construction, like you just said, you know, it's not a firefight anymore. Now it's a fire drill because a subcontractor, you know, didn't order a piece of equipment or, you know, something didn't start up the right way. Those talents and those skills will shine brightly, and you won't start there, but you will get there a lot quicker than somebody else.
yeah.
Guaranteed.
Yep.
You
Yeah.
know,
It doesn't put you ahead necessarily, but I get what you're saying. Like somebody takes a chance on a vet, they're going to see that this individual has just something. They got the sauce. They know what's going on.
yeah, the ability, what I'm finding now, you know, and this is shocking to me because, you know, I'm not the oldest guy in the room, but I'm not the youngest either. I've got some gray hairs, but, you know, I'm not, you know, the 50-year in the industry guy. What I'm seeing now I look for, you know, specifically veterans, I try to hire veterans because a lot of this younger generation that I'm seeing now lacks the ability to make decisions and live with the consequences. You know, there's a lot of coddling out there. There's a lot of people that are afraid of failure that will not make a decision. They will want you to hold their hand. They want you to specifically show them every step and then reward them with a, you know, pat on the backside, you know, when they've done a good job, but then don't be too critical of them if they didn't, you know, meet expectations. A vet, you know, a lot of us have been in situations where you've had to make a decision, or, you know, somebody died or you died or somebody didn't get home. So I find that something specific to veterans coming to construction, that, you know, if they're a superintendent out in the field and there's something that has to meet with a schedule, they will give direction and make a decision right then. And they will live and die by the consequences. You know, if it's something that costs money, you know, they'll say, hey, look, you know, we had to make it happen. Or, you know, if it was something with schedule, you know, that's something that a vet brings that I find, you know, that I appreciate. A lot of, you know, these younger kids out of college, you know, they want to, you know, they got a 4-year degree, and, you know, that in a book of matches, you can just about start a fire. and they want to walk into these jobs. They have no experience. Whereas, a vet coming in that doesn't necessarily have a degree or is still going to school, they can make that decision and make you success, make that job successful.
What do you think is
That's
causing
something.
that lack of confidence? Because that's what I think it is just this awkward lack of confidence amongst a newer generation.
It's cliche because I've heard other people say it too, but the more I hear it, the more I see it, it's true. These participation trophies, these, safe spaces, these, it's okay, everybody's special. It has taken, it has diminished a lot of these kids, and I call them kids because I'm getting a little bit older. They're afraid of failure. Everything's been handed to them, or they've told them, they're super special, and it's okay. Nobody's gonna hurt your feelings. Sometimes you just have to take a leap. Sometimes you have to take a chance. And a lot of this generation, they're afraid to do that because they've been handed everything their entire life, and they've never had to face consequences.
Yeah, I'll put myself out there. I don't know if it's necessarily a generational thing too. Like the big difference between vets maybe and non-vets. Like I gotta give it to a chief that I had very early on. I think it was an E2, maybe an E3. And I made excuses and all this stuff. And he was such a good mentor and leader. After being hard on me, he finally pulled me aside and he's like, look, man, just admit when you're wrong and you screwed up. And the punishments were so much, I don't want to say easier, but they were more proud of me for just saying, I screwed up. I owned up to it. I screwed this up. I'm sorry. And so when I transitioned out, I can remember when actually the first job, come to think of it, that I was an assistant superintendent on that I got to run. It was this politically charged job, very visible. And I made a mistake where I didn't realize every time you called a guy out to scan for the cores, that cost more and more money, that service charge. I ended up calling the guy out like 5 times. I was so terrified to call the PM and say, hey man, I just cost us like $2,000. I'm so sorry. But he was so kind about it. Hey, it happens. I'm used to getting my butt chewed. So I'm thinking, oh my gosh, this guy's going to tear me a new one. But that helped me understand, hey, it's not that big of a deal. I took ownership. I did cost some money. It's not coming out of my paycheck. It sucks. We make mistakes. Just don't do it again. So I've got some folks that I train, and I tell every single guy, hey, you're going to fail. You got to get used to it, man. You got to make a call, because if you don't make a call, you're never going anywhere in your career. I'm just very blunt with them. You have to be the voice of reason. You got to make a decision, like you said. And if you don't, if you're constantly calling me, I mean, you're going to stay where you're at. You got to, if you want to be a leader, a superintendent, a project manager, you have to step up and make the call. But I'm always there when they do fail to learn from it. We have like the after action report, right? So we do that AAR to say, okay, what happened? How can we learn from it? Let's do it again. And it's different when they're constantly making the same mistake, right? There are those people out there, and maybe you're not getting through to them, but there's that one guy that can take the constructive criticism. And you're right. Veterans are really good with that, I think, because the butt chewings in our industry are a lot less than they are in the service. So you're not throwing them against a Connex box or something crazy, but you're just, hey man, you screwed up. It is what it is. It sucks. Let's learn from it. So yeah, it builds that resiliency, I'd say.
Yeah, criticism's a lot different from a good old smoke session.
Yeah, the Connex box counseling is what we had. Yeah, just go beat it out of them. So if you have folks that are transitioning out now, and like I told you, that's my biggest passion for this podcast is trying to get to the folks. I had mentioned in my first episode there was a big drawdown because of Afghanistan that we all know about. So you've got a lot of folks getting out. The same thing happened when I got out. There was this big reduction in force. And what would you say to somebody that's in that process about to get out, about our industry, to try to encourage them to join this industry, that, hey, this is an option for you if you think there's nothing else out there, whether or not they have a degree, whether or not they have any prior hammer swinging experience? What would you say to that individual to try to get them into our industry?
The construction industry is, it's a good industry. I think a lot of people, like when I was getting out, they were thinking, the stigma was like, oh, if you end up in construction, you're doing landscaping and, you never get out to anything. You know, there's all kinds of different avenues in construction. There's residential, there's commercial, there's, industrial, there's pharmaceuticals, which I, ended up in just randomly. There's, data centers and Amazon centers. There's all kinds of different fits and opportunities there. And, it's translatable to, that work ethic that you have, that work ethic and that integrity that you bring. There's going to be something in construction that's translatable to you. And it's just, what you're willing to put into it and, how far you want to take it. I think the sky's the limit, with veterans transitioning into construction.
Yeah, it's good. I see a lot of folks preparing a lot earlier, I know, than I did. There's some really good programs out there, like the Skill Bridge programs, and folks they're not even on terminal leave yet, but I don't know the ins and outs. So if somebody out there that's listening, by all means, please educate me on this. But folks that are within maybe their last year that are teamed up with companies and just learning about the industry they want to go into. So I think that's great. So if you had someone that was maybe within a year or 6 months from getting out, how would you, if they want to get into our industry, what would you tell them to best prepare? If that's a certification or some sort of education, what would you tell them?
I mean, safety, definitely, go get your, OSHA 30 for sure. Get exposed to what that type of, work environment looks like in a construction environment. Try to find, try to get an internship. Maybe, like we said, you're not going to start out as a superintendent or a project manager, but don't be afraid to, go to somebody in a career fair or knock on a job site trailer even and say, hey, look, I'm interested. I want to do this. What can I learn? What can you teach me on a job site? What can I learn from you, that I can't learn from a book? Because that's one of the things that's one of the other things I found. I've learned more from the old gray-haired guys in the job site trailer than I've ever learned in a book. So, put yourself out there, take a risk, ask, to be involved, get an internship, try to get on a job site somehow, and then, the academics will follow.
That's good. So the OSHA 30 thing you mentioned too, and other trainings, I think people will be surprised to find out that, your tuition assistance might pay for some of that stuff, or you start tapping into your GI Bill. There's so many more programs now that I'm sure when you got out or when I got out, there's so many more programs that accept that form of payment. So it's not like you're coming out of pocket for that. I would encourage people to use that tuition assistance. That paid for almost all of my associates. So I got all my basic classes out of the way, but use what the government gives you to train up. So I think I didn't even think about that. Getting an OSHA 30 when you get out. I mean, there's guys, gosh, that have been in the industry for decades sometimes now that don't even have it still. So that'll definitely put you ahead.
You touched on it early. Mm-hmm. You touched on it early with guys that are in safety. There's a lot of translatable gentlemen that I've met, and men and women that were veterans that translate into safety that are OSHA 500, OSHA 510 certified that run an entire safety program for companies and job sites. That structure and that attention to detail and being living by the letter of the law, that translates easily into a safety professional in a construction environment. I look at a lot of them like range officers. They let us operate within a certain parameter, but they keep us safe, right? And it's the same thing on a construction site.
Yeah, you got your left and right lateral limit, and you got to stay within that. That's a good comparison. I appreciate it. So,
yeah.
Well, Mark, man, I really appreciate your time tonight, and I'm looking forward to learning more about pharmaceutical construction now. So I'm sure I'll be hitting you up about some knowledge that I'm needing. So, man, any final thoughts?
And just for those guys that are getting out there, that are getting out and transitioning, and if you're interested in construction, it's definitely worth it. The sky's the limit. It's not all building houses. There's a lot out there. There's roads and pharmaceuticals and high rises, and the sky's the limit. And take a chance and get out there and, use that same mentality that you got in the military, that you have to get the mission done and you'll be very successful. I welcome any opportunity to, expose pharmaceuticals specifically to anybody that being interested, just hit me up. And, it's a niche industry. It's not typical, but it's rewarding.
So if folks do want to hit you up, how would they do that, Mark? How can we get a hold of you?
Yeah, if you wanted to reach out, you can, of course, you can find me on LinkedIn, or you can send me an email at mblackwelder@PROTECS Inc.com.
Awesome, Mark. I appreciate your time, man. Thank you very much for doing this.
Thanks, Scott. Thanks for having me, man.
All right. If you're a military veteran in the construction industry, or you're in the construction industry and support our military vets, and you'd like to be a guest on the podcast, you can find me at constructionvetpodcast@gmail.com, or send me a message on LinkedIn. You can find me there at Scott Friend. Let's share the stories and motivate others.